The cafe stood wedged between a cryptocurrency exchange and a meditation studio, its windows fogged with the breath of those who had nowhere else to be on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena Markova wiped down the marble counter with mechanical precision. Her movements betrayed neither enthusiasm nor despair, merely the practiced efficiency of one who had learned to make invisibility an art form. The espresso machine hissed its familiar protest, and she attended to it with the same detached care she gave to everything in this gleaming temple of overpriced coffee and underlived lives. She had been in New York for 3 years, though it felt simultaneously like 3 decades and 3 days. Time possessed a peculiar elasticity when one existed in the margins of a city that devoured ambition as readily as it manufactured it. Her English had improved considerably since those first bewildering months, when every conversation felt like swimming through molasses, but her accent remained, clinging to her words like morning fog to the Hudson. She minded it less now. The customers rarely noticed her long enough to comment upon anything so personal as her voice. The afternoon stretched before her with its usual tedium. A young woman in athleisure, wear that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, ordered a matcha latte with oat milk, no foam, exactly 140 degrees. A man in a suit that whispered of Wall Street demanded his flat white be remade because the foam art was asymmetrical. Elena obliged them all with the same neutral pleasantness, her face a mask that revealed nothing of the person beneath. She had learned this talent in her previous life, before the cafe, before New York, when she had been someone else entirely. That was when he entered. She sensed him before she saw him, the way one senses a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. The cafe's atmosphere altered subtly, conversations dropping half a decibel, eyes lifting from laptop screens and smartphone displays. He moved through the space as though he owned it, which perhaps he did. Elena had ceased being surprised by the extent of real estate portfolios in this city. He was not young, perhaps 50, with the kind of face that suggested both considerable intelligence and considerable indulgence. His suit was bespoke, his watch Swiss, his shoes Italian. Everything about him announced wealth with the quiet confidence of those who had never known its absence. He approached the counter where Elena stood, and his eyes, pale grey, sharp as winter light, fixed upon her with an intensity that made her instinctively straighten her spine. She had been observed by men before, assessed and categorized and occasionally pursued, but this gaze was different. It was not desire she saw there, nor simple curiosity. It was recognition, though of what she could not immediately discern. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What can I prepare for you today?" He smiled, and there was something vulpine in the expression. "That's an interesting accent. Russian?" Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily on the espresso portafilter. She had grown weary of this question, weary of the assumptions that followed it. "I can make you an espresso, an americano, a cappuccino." "I asked you a question," he interrupted, though his tone remained pleasant. "It's Russian, isn't it? Your accent." She met his gaze steadily, allowing nothing of her thoughts to surface in her expression. "Yes. Now, what would you like to drink? How long have you been in New York?" He leaned against the counter with casual ease, as though they were old acquaintances catching up rather than stranger and service worker enacting their prescribed roles. 3 years. Sir, there are other customers waiting." This was untrue. The cafe had emptied during their exchange, the afternoon lull having settled over the space like dust. But she hoped the fiction might end this conversation before it ventured into territories she had no wish to explore. He glanced around the empty cafe, then back at her, his smile widening. "So there are invisible customers, very demanding, I imagine." He paused, studying her face with that same unsettling intensity. "You're educated. I can hear it in the way you speak English, even with the accent. University." Elena's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I'll make you an Americano. That will be $4.75. I didn't order yet." He pulled out his wallet, extracting a black credit card that caught the light like obsidian. "But I'll have that Americano. and I have a proposition for you." She rang up the order without responding, her movements precise and controlled. The espresso machine provided a welcome wall of sound as she prepared his drink, but she could feel his attention upon her, patient and unyielding. When she placed the cup before him, he made no move to take it. "I need someone who speaks Russian," he said. "Fluently, native level, for business meetings primarily, but also some social occasions, translation, interpretation, occasional cultural consultation. The pay is excellent, considerably better than what you're earning here, I assure you. I'll pay you $10,000 monthly, cash if you prefer, though I can arrange proper employment contracts with all the legal niceties if that's your preference." Elena stared at him, her expression carefully blank while her mind raced. $10,000. The number was absurd, impossible. Her rent was $1,800 for a room in an apartment she shared with 3 other women in Queens. She sent money home monthly to her mother in Moscow, small amounts that were nevertheless significant when converted to rubles. She had exactly $1,100 in her bank account and credit card debt that grew with the steady persistence of Ivy. Why? The question emerged before she could stop it. Why what? Why would you pay someone $10,000 monthly for translation? There are services, professionals, people with credentials and experience in business interpretation. Why approach a cafe worker? He picked up his Americano, took a measured sip, and nodded approvingly. Good coffee. To answer your question, I prefer personal arrangements over agencies. I value discretion, loyalty, and a certain flexibility that professional services tend to lack. You strike me as someone who understands discretion. Am I wrong? She said nothing, but something in her silence seemed to satisfy him. I thought not. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the counter between them. My name is Harrison Vogt. I own several companies, most of which bore people at parties when I described them. Real estate primarily, but some tech investments, a few hospitality ventures. I do considerable business with Russian clients and partners. My last translator relocated to California. Family matters, and I find myself in need of a replacement. That's where you come in. Elena looked at the card but did not touch it. I'm not a professional translator. That's not a problem. You're a native speaker. You're clearly intelligent, and you have the one quality I prize above all others in my employees. He paused. You know how to keep your mouth shut. The observation landed with peculiar weight. Elena felt suddenly as though she were standing on ice of uncertain thickness, unable to determine whether the surface would hold or give way beneath her. This man saw too much, perceived too clearly. It was dangerous. I have a job, she said finally. You have a job that pays you minimum wage to serve overpriced coffee to people who don't see you as human. I'm offering you $10,000 monthly to speak your native language and attend meetings. If you need time to consider, that's fine. Take my card. Call me when you've decided. But I should mention that I need someone to start within the week, so I'll need your answer soon. He finished his Americano, left a $20 bill on the counter, and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused and turned back. One more thing, Miss Markova. Elena Markova. Miss Markova. I should probably mention that the work involves some international travel. Moscow primarily, but also London, and occasionally Dubai. If you have passport issues or visa concerns, I have attorneys who can handle that. Just something to consider. Dim, then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft pneumatic sigh. Elena stood motionless behind the counter, staring at the business card as though it were a live grenade. The embossed letters spelled out Harrison Vogt, followed by a phone number and an email address. No company name, no title, just the name and contact information, as though these alone were sufficient identification. $10,000 monthly. The number circled in her mind like a bird of prey. It was enough to pay her rent and send money home and begin erasing her debt. It was enough to stop living on instant noodles and day-old pastries she took from the cafe before they were discarded. It was enough to feel for the first time since arriving in this country like she was something other than invisible. But instinct, honed through experiences she preferred not to examine too closely, whispered warnings. Men like Harrison Vogt did not approach cafe workers with such offers unless they wanted something beyond translation services. The world was not so generous. There were always conditions, always prices that revealed themselves only after contracts were signed and escape's routes had narrowed. She picked up the business card and slipped it into her apron pocket. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of mechanical actions. She made drinks, wiped counters, restocked pastries, emptied tip jars. At 6 o'clock, she removed her apron, collected her coat from the back room, and stepped into the November cold. The subway carried her toward Queens through tunnels that smelled of metal and human density. In the apartment, her roommates were arguing in rapid-fire Mandarin about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. Elena retreated to her room, barely large enough for a twin bed and a narrow dresser, and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at Harrison Vougt's business card. She thought about her mother's voice during their last phone call, cheerful but strained, mentioning casually that heating costs had increased again. She thought about her credit card statement, the numbers climbing with mathematical inevitability. She thought about the PhD she had abandoned halfway through, the dissertation on 19th century Russian literature that would never be completed, the academic career that had evaporated like morning dew. She thought about the expression in Harrison Vougt's eyes when he had looked at her, that recognition of something he perceived in her, some quality he valued, discretion, loyalty, the ability to keep her mouth shut. What had he seen in her that announced these qualities? Elena stood and moved to the window, looking out at the jumble of Queens rooftops and fire escapes. Lights were beginning to appear in windows as people returned home from work, small golden squares of domestic life. She felt suddenly the weight of her isolation, the vast distance between herself and anything resembling home or belonging. She took out her phone and stared at the number on the business card for a long moment. Then, before she could reconsider, she typed out a message. "This is Elena Markova from the cafe. I would like to discuss your offer. When can we meet?" The response came within 2 minutes. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll send a car to pick you up. What's your address?" She provided it, her fingers moving across the screen with a strange sense of inevitability, as though she were not making a choice, but rather following a path that had been laid out before her, visible only now that she had agreed to walk it. "Perfect. Dress professionally. We'll discuss terms over breakfast." Eleanor set down her phone and returned to the window. The city spread before her, indifferent and immense, full of people pursuing their own narrow survival. She was about to make a decision that would alter her trajectory, possibly irrevocably. The smart thing would be to research Harrison Vogt, to investigate his companies, to approach this opportunity with skepticism and caution. But caution was a luxury afforded to those who had options, and Elena had learned long ago that she possessed fewer options than she might wish. Sometimes survival meant accepting risks that more fortunate people could refuse. Sometimes it meant walking through doors, even when you could not see what lay on the other side. She would meet Harrison Vogt tomorrow. She would listen to his offer, and then she would decide whether to step into whatever world he was offering, or remain in the safe, small poverty she had grown accustomed to inhabiting. The choice, she told herself, was still hers to make. Though even as she thought this, some deeper part of her suspected that the choice had already been made the moment Harrison Vogt had walked into that cafe and recognized something in her that she had hoped to keep hidden. The car that arrived at 9:45 the following morning was not the ostentatious limousine Eleanor had half expected, but rather a sleek black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who nodded politely without introducing himself. She had spent an hour selecting her outfit from the limited professional wardrobe she possessed, a grey wool dress she had purchased for academic conferences in her previous life, paired with boots that were only slightly scuffed. In the mirror, She looked severe and competent, which she supposed was the intended effect. Her roommates had already departed for their various employments, leaving the apartment in its usual state of organized chaos. Elena locked the door behind her and descended the stairs with a strange lightness in her chest, as though she were shedding some invisible weight with each step. The driver opened the rear door without speaking, and she slid into leather seats that smelled of expensive conditioning treatments. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, entering the morning traffic with practiced ease. They crossed the Queensboro Bridge. As pale sunlight struggled through November clouds, Manhattan rising before them like a promise or a threat, depending on one's perspective. Elena watched the city approach, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her expression composed. She had learned, during her years of navigating institutional bureaucracies and academic hierarchies, to present a face of calm capability regardless of the turbulence beneath. This skill was serving her well now. The car delivered her to a building in Midtown, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. The driver gestured toward the entrance, and Elena stepped out into the cold morning air, her breath visible in small clouds. Inside, the lobby was cathedral-like in its proportions, with marble floors that echoed footsteps and a security desk staffed by individuals who looked more suited to military service than civilian employment. She approached the desk with measured confidence. "Elena Markova, I have a meeting with Harrison Vout." The security guard consulted his computer screen, then nodded and gestured toward the elevators. 42nd floor. Someone will meet you there." The elevator rose with disorienting speed, her ears popping slightly as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, she found herself in a reception area that was minimalist to the point of severity. White walls, black furniture, a single arrangement of orchids that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A young man in an impeccable suit approached immediately. "Miss Markova, please follow me. Mr. Vout is expecting you." They walked through corridors lined with abstract art that Elena suspected was original rather than reproduction, past offices where people worked with the focused intensity of those who were compensated handsomely for their time. The young man stopped before a set of double doors, knocked once, and opened them without waiting for a response. The office beyond was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Manhattan that stretched to the harbor. Harrison Vout stood at these windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in what sounded like Mandarin with native fluency. He gestured for Elena to enter without turning around, and she stepped inside as the doors closed behind her with a soft click. She waited, studying the space while he finished his conversation. The office was expensively furnished but oddly impersonal, lacking photographs or personal effects that might suggest interior life. Books lined one wall, mostly business texts and political biographies, and a conference table occupied one corner, its surface gleaming and empty. It was the office of someone who spent little time in contemplation and much time in motion. Harrison ended his call and turned to face her, his expression brightening with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "Miss Markova, punctual, excellent. Please sit." He gestured toward a sitting area where breakfast had been laid out on a low table. Coffee, pastries, fruit, items that suggested casual elegance rather than formal dining. Elena sat, her posture straight, her hands resting in her lap. Harrison settled into the chair opposite, pouring coffee for both of them with practiced ease. "I'm glad you contacted me," he said. "I had a feeling you would. You have that quality, the ability to recognize opportunity when it presents itself. Not everyone possesses it. Most people are too afraid or too proud or too stupid. But you're none of those things, are you?" She accepted the coffee but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. She had learned that silence often extracted more information than questions. "Let me be direct about what I'm offering," Harrison continued. "I need someone who can translate for me in business meetings with Russian clients and partners. This involves real estate deals primarily, though occasionally other ventures. The meetings can be lengthy, sometimes several hours, and they require someone who can not only translate words, but understand context, subtext, the things that aren't being said explicitly. Do you understand what I mean? You need someone who understands Russian business culture, Elena said. Not just language. Exactly. The Russians I work with are sophisticated operators. They're not interested in American-style directness. Everything is layers, implications, relationships built over time. I need someone who can navigate that landscape, who can tell me what's really being communicated beneath the surface pleasantries. Elena sipped her coffee, considering this. That's more than translation. That's cultural consultation, negotiation advisory. That typically commands a higher fee than $10,000 monthly. Harrison's smile widened. I thought you might say that. You're right, of course. So let's say $15,000 monthly, plus expenses when travel is required. First-class flights, good hotels, per diem that's actually adequate, and bonuses tied to successful deal closures. If a negotiation you assist with results in a completed transaction, you receive 2% of my commission. Some of these deals are worth millions. The math is favorable. Elena set down her coffee cup carefully, her mind calculating rapidly. $15,000 monthly was more than she had earned in the best year of her previous life as a graduate student instructor. 2% of commission on million-dollar deals could be transformative. It was the kind of money that could erase debt, build savings, perhaps even allow her to consider returning to her studies. It was also the kind of money that suggested either extraordinary generosity or extraordinary expectations. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Harrison laughed, the sound genuine and surprisingly warm. I like you, Miss Markova. Most people would simply accept and ask questions later. You're asking them now, which shows intelligence. What aren't I telling you? Several things. First, the work is demanding. Meetings often happen at inconvenient hours. Russians don't care much about American business hours. You'll need to be available essentially whenever needed. Second, discretion is non-negotiable. Everything you see, hear, or learn in the course of your work is confidential. You sign an NDA and you honor it. Third, some of the people I work with are difficult. Oligarchs mostly, or people connected to oligarchs. They can be demanding, occasionally rude, sometimes inappropriate. You need to be able to handle that without creating incidents. Inappropriate how? Elena kept her voice neutral, but something cold settled in her stomach. They're men who are accustomed to getting what they want. They may make comments, suggestions, invitations. You decline politely and professionally, and you inform me if anyone crosses clear boundaries. I'm not running an escort service, Miss Markova. I need a translator, not a companion. But I'd be lying if I said the environment was entirely comfortable. You need to be able to maintain professional boundaries in situations where others may not respect them. Elena considered this. She had dealt with inappropriate professors, with men who mistook professional interaction for personal invitation, with the countless small violations that women learned to navigate as the price of participation in professional spaces. She had survived worse than uncomfortable comments from wealthy men. I can manage that, she said. I thought you might. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same penetrating gaze from the cafe. Now, let me ask you something. Why did you leave Russia? And please don't give me some sanitized version. I need to know what I'm working with. The question landed with surprising force. Eleanor felt her careful composure waver momentarily before she reassembled it. That's personal and relevant. You're going to be my representative in sensitive negotiations. I need to know if there's anything in your background that could be leveraged against you, anything that could compromise your position or mine. So I'll ask again, why did you leave Russia? She met his gaze steadily, weighing her options. She could lie, construct some acceptable fiction about seeking opportunity or adventure. But Harrison Vought struck her as someone who would detect falsehood immediately and who would respect truth more than comfortable invention. I was a PhD candidate at Moscow State University, she said finally. 19th century Russian literature, focusing on women writers who had been marginalized by the canonical tradition. I had a promising academic career ahead of me. And then I made the mistake of becoming involved with another professor, someone senior to me, someone who was married. When his wife discovered the affair, she had connections, political connections. Suddenly my funding disappeared, my dissertation committee dissolved, and I found myself unable to secure any academic position in Russia. So I came here on a tourist visa, overstayed, eventually managed to obtain work authorization through a program for victims of trafficking, though I was never actually trafficked. I've been rebuilding ever since. The words emerged with a flatness that belied their weight. She had not spoken this history aloud in years, had sealed it away in some interior vault where shameful memories were kept. But Harrison had asked, and some instinct told her that honesty was the only currency he truly valued. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful but not judgmental. Thank you for your candor. That can't have been easy to share. For what it's worth, I don't care about your past except insofar as it affects the present. The situation you described doesn't concern me professionally. In fact, it tells me something useful. What's that? That you know how to survive in hostile environments, that you understand power dynamics and how to navigate them, that you're not naive about how the world actually works. Those are valuable qualities in this line of work. He paused, pouring more coffee. Now let me tell you what I need to know from you before we proceed. Can you start immediately? I have a meeting scheduled for Friday evening with Dmitry Sokolov. He's a real estate developer from Moscow looking to purchase commercial property in Manhattan. The meeting will be in Russian, several hours at a restaurant in Brighton Beach. I need you there, taking notes, translating, reading the room. Can you do that? Friday was 3 days away. Elena thought of her cafe job, the schedule she was supposed to work, the small obligation to give notice that professional courtesy suggested. Then she thought of $15,000 monthly and 2% commission on deals worth millions. Yes, she said, I can do that. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you the details. In the meantime, I need you to come to my office tomorrow afternoon for a briefing. I'll give you background on Sokolov, on the property deal, on the key points I'm trying to negotiate. You'll need to familiarize yourself with real estate terminology in both languages. Can you do that? I can. Good. Now, contracts. Harrison stood and moved to his desk, returning with a folder containing several documents. Standard employment agreement, NDA, tax forms. Read them carefully. If you want to have an attorney review them, that's fine, though you'll need to do it quickly. Sign them and return them tomorrow when you come for the briefing. Your first payment will be made Friday after the meeting, assuming everything goes well. Any questions? Elena took the folder, feeling its weight in her hands. Just one. Why me? You still haven't really answered that. There are professional translation services, people with credentials and experience in business interpretation. What made you approach me? Harrison returned to his chair, settling into it with the ease of someone who had answered difficult questions many times before. Honest answer? I've worked with professional services before. They're competent but limited. They translate words accurately but miss the deeper currents. They lack flexibility. They won't work irregular hours. They won't travel on short notice. They maintain professional distance that sometimes interferes with relationship building. What I saw in you at that cafe was something different. I saw someone who was educated, intelligent, clearly capable of more than serving coffee. Someone who had fallen from a previous position and was hungry to climb back up. Someone who understood discretion because she'd learned the hard way what happened when discretion failed. Someone who would be loyal because loyalty would be in her interest. Was I wrong? Elena considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He had read her accurately, perhaps more accurately than she was comfortable acknowledging. She was hungry. She did understand discretion. And loyalty, pragmatic loyalty based on mutual benefit, was something she could offer. No, she said quietly. You weren't wrong. Then we understand each other. Good. That's the foundation of any successful working relationship: mutual understanding and mutual benefit. You need what I can provide, and I need what you can provide. Everything else is detail. He glanced at his watch. I have another meeting in 10 minutes, so I'll need to end this conversation. But welcome aboard, Miss Markova. I think this arrangement will work out well for both of us. He stood, extending his hand. Elena rose and shook it, his grip firm and brief. The young man who had escorted her earlier reappeared as though summoned by telepathy, ready to guide her out. One more thing, Harrison said as she reached the door. The cafe. You'll need to quit. Do it today. Whatever notice they require, I'll compensate you for it. I need you fully available for this work, not splitting attention between two jobs. Understood? Elena nodded. Understood. Good. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Don't be late. The dismissal was clear. Elena followed the young man back through the corridors, into the elevator, through the cathedral lobby. The driver was waiting with the car, and she slid into the back seat in a daze, the folder of contracts resting on her lap like a talisman. The drive back to Queens passed in a blur. She stared out the window at the city, seeing it differently now, as though some veil had lifted. She was no longer entirely outside of it, no longer entirely invisible. Harrison Vaught had seen her, had recognized something of value, had offered her entry into a world she had only observed from the margins. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like vertigo, like standing at the edge of some precipice, unable to determine the depth of the drop below. Back in her apartment, Elena spread the contracts across her narrow bed and began to read. The employment agreement was straightforward: 15,000 monthly salary, performance bonuses as described, benefits including health insurance, and 401k matching. The NDA was more extensive, prohibiting disclosure of any information obtained through her work, with severe financial penalties for violation. There were clauses about arbitration, about termination conditions, about liability limitations. She read each page carefully, her academic training serving her well. There was nothing obviously exploitative, nothing that raised immediate alarm. It was a generous offer, professionally structured, legally sound as far as she could determine. She signed the documents with a pen she had stolen from a bank, her signature dark against the white pages. That afternoon, she walked to the cafe and requested a meeting with the manager, a harried woman in her 30s who perpetually smelled of vanilla syrup. Elena gave her notice, 2 weeks, as courtesy suggested, and watched the woman's face cycle through surprise, irritation, and finally, resignation. "I understand," the manager said, though her tone suggested she did not understand at all. "I'll need you to work through the weekend at least. We're short-staffed." "Of course," Elena agreed, though she knew she would not complete even that limited obligation. Harrison Vaught had made it clear her employment began immediately, and she had learned long ago that loyalty to institutions that paid minimum wage was a luxury she could not afford. She worked her shift with a strange sense of detachment, as though she were observing herself from a distance. The customers came and went with their usual demands, and she fulfilled them with her usual efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating possibilities and risks. That evening, she sat at the narrow desk in her room and drafted her resignation email, effective immediately. She cited family emergency, apologized for the lack of notice, and hit send before she could reconsider. Then she opened her laptop and began researching Russian real estate terminology, compiling lists of vocabulary she would need for Friday's meeting. She worked until past midnight, her eyes burning with fatigue, her mind racing with new information. When she finally slept, her dreams were fragmented and anxious, full of conversations in languages that shifted mid-sentence, of men whose faces she could not quite see making offers she could not quite understand. She woke at dawn and continued her preparation. By the time she needed to leave for Harrison's office the following afternoon, she had created a comprehensive glossary of terms, had reviewed news articles about Moscow real estate markets, had even located a photograph of Dmitry Sokolov online, a heavy-set man in his 50s with the kind of face that suggested both intelligence and ruthlessness. The drive to Midtown felt familiar now, as though she had been making this journey for years rather than days. The security guard recognized her, waving her through without requesting identification. The elevator carried her upward with the same disorienting speed, and the young man who had escorted her previously was waiting when the doors opened. "Miss Markova, please follow me. Mr. Vout is expecting you." This time, Harrison's office was occupied by 3 other people when she entered. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in expensive business attire, all studying her with undisguised curiosity. Harrison stood at the conference table, where maps and property documents were spread across its surface. "Gentlemen, Catherine, this is Elena Markova, my new Russian specialist. Elena, these are my senior associates, Michael Chen, David Rothstein, and Catherine Morrison. They'll be present at various meetings, so you should familiarize yourself with them." Elena shook hands with each, noting their expressions. Chen was neutral, Rothstein skeptical, Morrison openly curious. She understood immediately that her presence here was unusual, that Harrison's decision to hire her had raised questions among his team. "Let's get started," Harrison said, gesturing for everyone to sit. "Elena, I'm going to walk you through the Sokolov deal so you understand what we're trying to accomplish on Friday. This is a complex negotiation, and I need you to understand not just the language, but the strategy. Pay attention." What followed was 3 hours of intensive briefing. Harrison explained that Dmitry Sokolov represented a consortium of Russian investors seeking to purchase a commercial property in Manhattan, a 30-story office building in Midtown valued at approximately $200 million. The deal had been in negotiation for months, complicated by sanctions, by financing issues, by political considerations that made Russian investment in American real estate increasingly scrutinized. Harrison's role was to facilitate the purchase, navigating the legal and financial obstacles, ensuring that all parties understood the risks and liabilities. He would earn a commission of 3% on the deal's completion, which meant $6 million if everything proceeded smoothly. Elena's 2% of that commission would be $120,000. The number was staggering. Elena listened with outward calm while her mind reeled at the implications. One successful deal could transform her entire financial situation. Several such deals could make her genuinely wealthy by any reasonable standard. But Harrison was clear about the challenges. Sokolov was notoriously difficult, prone to changing terms mid-negotiation, suspicious of American business practices. Previous meetings had been tense, occasionally hostile. Harrison needed Elena to help him navigate Sokolov's communication style, to identify when the Russian was posturing versus when he was genuinely prepared to walk away from the deal. "Your job," Harrison said, looking directly at Elena, "is to make Sokolov feel comfortable. Speak to him in Russian when appropriate, even when I'm not asking for translation. Build rapport. Russian businessmen trust other Russians more than they trust Americans. Use that. But never forget that you work for me, not for him. You're gathering information, reading his reactions, helping me understand his position." "Clear?" "Clear," Elena said. Friday evening arrived with the inevitability of judgment, and Elena found herself in the back of Harrison's car as it navigated toward Brighton Beach, that peculiar enclave of Russian Brooklyn where Cyrillic signs competed with English and the smell of smoked fish drifted from storefronts. She wore a black dress she had purchased that afternoon, with money Harrison had advanced her, professional but not severe, expensive enough to signal competence without ostentation. Her hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, her makeup minimal. She had dressed, she realized, as a translator should dress, present but not prominent, capable but not threatening. Harrison sat beside her, reviewing documents on his tablet, his expression focused and remote. He had said little during the drive. and Elena had learned already that his silences were not uncomfortable, but rather indicative of mental preparation. He was, she was coming to understand, a man who wasted neither words nor gestures, who operated with an economy of expression that suggested years of disciplined self-presentation. The restaurant was called Tatiana, a Brighton Beach institution that occupied a prime position overlooking the boardwalk and the winter-dark Atlantic. They arrived precisely on time, neither early nor late as Harrison had instructed, and were greeted immediately by a host who recognized Harrison and led them to a private dining room at the rear of the establishment. The space was decorated in that particular aesthetic favored by wealthy Russians: abundant crystal, heavy curtains, gold accents that bordered on excessive but somehow achieved elegance through sheer commitment to vision. Dmitry Sokolov was already seated, flanked by two other men who had the unmistakable bearing of security personnel despite their expensive suits. Sokolov himself was larger than his photographs had suggested, with the kind of physical presence that commanded attention through mass rather than height. His face was broad and florid, his eyes small and calculating, set deep beneath heavy brows. He wore a suit that probably cost $10,000, but fit him poorly, as though his body resisted the constraints of tailored clothing. He stood as they entered, and his eyes moved immediately to Elena, assessing her with a directness that made her instinctively straighten her spine. Then he smiled, and the expression transformed his face into something almost pleasant. "Vort," he said in heavily accented English, extending his hand. "You are punctual. This is good. And you have brought a beautiful companion. This is also good." Harrison shook his hand firmly. "Dmitry, allow me to introduce Elena Markova, my translator and Russian specialist. Elena, Dmitry Sokolov." Elena stepped forward, extending her hand. Sokolov took it, his grip crushing, and spoke to her in rapid Russian. "So you are the one who will help this American understand what I am actually saying. Tell me, are you from Moscow?" "Yes," Elena replied in Russian, gently but firmly extracting her hand from his grip. "Born and educated there. I studied at Moscow State University before coming to America." Sokolov's expression shifted slightly, new interest kindling in his small eyes. "Moscow State? What did you study?" "Literature. 19th century. Turgenev, Tolstoy, the realists." "Ah, a woman of culture trapped in a city of merchants." He gestured broadly around the room, as though indicting not just the restaurant, but all of New York. "You must find it barbaric here, all this American obsession with money and efficiency. No soul, no depth." Elena smiled politely. "Every culture has its virtues and limitations. I've learned to appreciate certain American qualities. Directness, for instance. It saves considerable time." Sokolov laughed, the sound booming in the enclosed space. "You hear that, Vort? Your translator is already educating me about American virtues. Perhaps this evening will be productive after all." He switched to English, addressing Harrison. "Sit, sit. We eat first, we talk business after. This is civilized way." They arranged themselves around the table, Elena positioning herself beside Harrison where she could observe both men easily. Sokolov's security personnel remained standing near the door, their presence a reminder that this was not simply a business dinner, but a negotiation conducted between parties who did not entirely trust one another. The meal that followed was excessive by any standard, course after course of Russian delicacies, from herring under fur coat to beef stroganoff, accompanied by vodka that Sokolov insisted everyone drink in the traditional manner, neat and followed by food rather than sipped. Harrison participated with good humor but moderation, and Elena followed his example, aware that she needed to maintain clarity even as Sokolov's consumption increased with each toast. The conversation during dinner ranged widely. Sokolov held forth on topics from Russian politics to American culture, his opinions delivered with the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being agreed with. He was intelligent, Elena noted, more sophisticated than his appearance suggested, capable of referencing literature and history with casual erudition. But beneath the cultured surface, she detected something harder, something that suggested he had not acquired his wealth through entirely legal means. Harrison engaged him skillfully, asking questions that encouraged Sokolov to talk while revealing little of his own positions. Elena translated when necessary, but more often simply listened, noting the dynamics between the two men. There was mutual respect, she observed, but not genuine liking. They were predators circling one another, assessing strengths and weaknesses, seeking advantage, while maintaining the pretense of collegiality. It was after the main courses had been cleared, and only vodka and tea remained, that Sokolov finally turned to business. He switched to Russian, speaking directly to Elena as though Harrison were not present. "Tell me honestly, as one Russian to another, can this American be trusted? He has a reputation for being clever, perhaps too clever. I need to know if he will honor his commitments or if he will find some legal technicality to extract additional fees once the deal is in motion." Elena felt Harrison's attention on her, though he maintained his expression of polite patience. She chose her words carefully, responding in Russian. "Mr. Vout honors his contracts. He is direct about costs and expectations. If he commits to terms, he fulfills them, but he expects the same in return. He has little patience for partners who change agreements after they are established." Sokolov studied her face as though searching for deception, then nodded slowly. "You speak plainly. This is good. Too many translators simply repeat words without conveying truth. You are different." He switched to English, addressing Harrison. "Your translator says you are honest, but inflexible. This is acceptable to me. I prefer clear terms to friendly deception. So let us discuss this property of yours, this building in Midtown that costs more than a small country's GDP. Harrison leaned forward slightly, his posture signaling engagement. "The building is valued at $200 million. That's not negotiable. The sellers have other interested parties, and they're not motivated to reduce price. What is negotiable is the financing structure, the timeline for closing, and certain contractual protections given current political considerations." Sokolov snorted dismissively. "Current political considerations? You mean sanctions? You mean American government looking suspiciously at Russian money? Yes, I understand these considerations. This is why deal is difficult. This is why previous negotiations have failed." He poured himself more vodka, drank it in one swallow, then continued in Russian, looking at Elena. "Ask him if he has solution to these political problems, or if he is simply another American who will take my money and then discover insurmountable obstacles," Elena translated, keeping her voice neutral. Harrison's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger, but calculation. When he responded, she translated his English into Russian with care to preserve both content and tone. "I don't make promises I can't keep. The political situation is complex, and there are genuine risks. What I offer is not certainty, but rather the most sophisticated legal and financial structuring available. We use a series of holding companies, some registered in jurisdictions that provide privacy while remaining compliant with international law. The actual ownership structure is layered sufficiently that casual scrutiny won't reveal the ultimate beneficial owners. However, if serious investigation occurs, if American authorities decide to look closely, these protections have limits. You need to understand that clearly before proceeding." Sokolov listened to Elena's translation, his expression growing more serious. He responded in Russian, his tone dropping. "And what is likelihood of such investigation? Give me honest assessment, not lawyer's equivocation." Harrison, understanding the question from Elena's partial translation even before she finished, replied immediately. "Currently? Low? The government is focused on larger players, on oligarchs with direct Kremlin connections. Your profile is relatively modest by those standards, but political winds change rapidly. What seems safe today may become risky tomorrow. That's the nature of operating in this environment. Elena translated, noting that Harrison's candor seemed to satisfy Sokolov more than reassurance would have. The Russian nodded slowly, then spoke in English again. This honesty is why I continue talking with you, Vought. Other brokers promise me moon and stars, tell me there is no risk, everything is perfect. You tell me truth. There is risk, there is uncertainty, but also there is opportunity. This I understand. This is language of real business, not American fantasy. He paused, refilling his glass and gesturing for the others to do likewise. So, here is my position. I am prepared to proceed with purchase, but I want additional protections beyond what you have proposed. I want option to withdraw from deal up to 2 weeks before closing if political situation changes, and I want your commission reduced from 3% to 2%. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but Elena felt rather than saw his tension. $6 million reduced to $4 million, a loss of $2 million from a single concession. She waited, curious to see how he would respond. The withdrawal option is workable, Harrison said carefully, though 2 weeks is insufficient time to protect my position with the sellers. If you withdraw late in the process, I'm left exposed, having invested significant resources with no compensation. So if you want a withdrawal option, it needs to be earlier in the process, say within the first 30 days of signing the purchase agreement. After that, you're committed. Sokolov frowned, about to object, but Harrison continued smoothly. As for the commission, 2% is below market rate for a transaction of this complexity and risk profile. However, I'm willing to structure it differently. 2% guaranteed, plus an additional 1% bonus if the deal closes without complications and within the proposed timeline. That way, my incentive aligns with your interest in efficient completion. Elena translated the counteroffer, watching Sokolov's face. She could see him calculating, weighing the terms against his own objectives. This was the crucial moment, she realized, when the negotiation could either progress toward agreement or collapse into stalemate. Sokolov was silent for a long moment, his small eyes moving between Harrison and Elena as though seeking some signal of weakness or desperation. Finding none, he finally spoke in Russian, addressing Elena but clearly intending his words for Harrison. Your employer is clever. He turns my demand for concession into opportunity for bonus. This is skillful negotiation. He switched to English. Very well, Vought. I accept your structure. 2% guaranteed, additional 1% for clean closing, and withdrawal option within 30 days. But I have one additional requirement. Harrison waited, his expression carefully neutral. I want weekly updates on deal progress delivered by Miss Markova here in Russian. Not emails, not phone calls, in-person meetings, 1 hour weekly at location of my choosing in New York. She reports on status, on any complications, on political developments that might affect transaction. This is how I know what is really happening, without filter of American legal language. Elena felt her stomach tighten. This was not translation work. This was something more complicated, something that positioned her between the two men as liaison and potential conduit of information. She glanced at Harrison, trying to read his reaction. Harrison considered the request for a moment, then looked at Elena. Would you be comfortable with that arrangement? The question surprised her. She had assumed he would simply agree or refuse based on his own calculation. That he was asking her opinion suggested either respect for her autonomy or concern about pushing her beyond agreed boundaries. Yes, she said, keeping her voice steady. As long as the meetings remain professional and focused on business matters. Sokolov laughed. Of course, professional. You think I am barbarian. I'm businessman. I want information, not companionship. Though, if Miss Markova wishes to discuss Turgenev over vodka, I would not object. His smile was genial, but his eyes remained calculating. Harrison nodded. Then we have an agreement in principle. I'll have my attorneys draft revised contracts incorporating these terms. You'll have them by Monday for review. We can plan to sign by end of next week if your legal team finds everything in order. Acceptable. Sokolov stood, extending his hand. This has been productive evening, Vote. Your translator is valuable asset. I hope you are paying her appropriately. I am, Harrison said, shaking his hand. Thank you for your time, Dmitri. I'll be in touch Monday morning. Sokolov turned to Elena, taking her hand again, but this time raising it briefly toward his lips in an old-fashioned gesture that managed to be courtly rather than presumptuous. Miss Markova, I look forward to our weekly conversations. It will be a pleasure to speak Russian with someone who understands proper literature instead of just business jargon. The pleasure will be mine, Elena replied in Russian, extricating her hand gently but firmly. Then Sokolov and his security personnel departed, leaving Elena and Harrison alone in the private dining room. Harrison remained standing for a moment, staring at the door through which the Russians had exited, his expression thoughtful and remote. Well, he said finally, turning to Elena, you did excellently. Better than I expected, frankly. You read him correctly, you translated with appropriate nuance, and you didn't allow him to intimidate you. That last part is important. Sokolov respects strength but exploits weakness. Thank you, Elena said, though she felt suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline of the evening draining away and leaving only fatigue. The weekly meetings, are you certain that's wise? It seems like it could complicate the relationship, create channels of communication that bypass you. Harrison smiled slightly. It does create that risk, but it also gives us intelligence. If Sokolov is concerned enough to demand weekly updates, that tells me he's seriously committed to the deal, and your meetings with him will give me insight into his thinking, his concerns, anything that might derail the transaction. You'll report back to me after each meeting, obviously. Think of yourself as my early warning system. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the logic, even as she recognized the ethical complexity. She would be reporting to Harrison about conversations with Sokolov, even while Sokolov believed she was simply providing updates. It wasn't quite betrayal. She had made no commitment to Sokolov beyond professional service, but it wasn't quite straightforward either. I understand, she said. Good, let's get you home. It's been a long evening and you've earned your fee. Harrison gestured toward the door, and they made their way out of the restaurant, past tables where other diners consumed their elaborate meals, oblivious to the negotiation that had just concluded. In the car, Harrison was more relaxed, his formal demeanor softening slightly. That bonus structure I proposed, 1% additional commission, you'll receive your 2% of that as well if it materializes. So if the deal closes smoothly, you're looking at $160,000 rather than $120,000. I wanted you to understand that your interests align with mine in this. Elena stared at him, momentarily speechless. $160,000. The number was incomprehensible, more money than she had earned in the entire 3 years since arriving in New York. Thank you, she managed finally. Don't thank me yet. We still need to close the deal, which is far from certain. Sokolov is committed now, but circumstances change rapidly in this business. Political developments, financial complications, personal issues, any number of factors could derail things. Your job over the coming weeks is to maintain relationship with him, to keep him engaged and confident, to alert me to any signs of wavering commitment. Can you do that? Yes? I believe you can. Harrison looked out the window at Brooklyn passing by, lights of shops and apartments creating patterns in the darkness. You know, when I approached you at that cafe, I was taking a considerable risk. You had no experience in this kind of work, no credentials beyond your education and your instincts. But sometimes the best hires are the ones who have something to prove, who are hungry enough to exceed expectations because failure isn't an option they can afford. I think you're that kind of person, Elena. Am I right? She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. Yes, she said quietly. You're right. Failure isn't an option I can afford. Good. Then we understand each other. He was silent for a moment, then continued. One more thing. Sokolov will likely test you, make subtle inquiries about me, about my business practices, about other clients. He'll frame it as casual conversation, but he's gathering intelligence. You should expect that and be prepared for it. Don't lie to him. He'll detect that immediately, but don't volunteer information either. If he asks questions you're uncomfortable answering, deflect politely and inform me afterward. Clear? Clear. The car pulled up outside her building in Queens, the shabby facade looking particularly uninspiring after the evening's luxury. Harrison handed her an envelope. First payment, as promised. $15,000 plus bonus for tonight's work. Let's call it $18,000 total. The next payment will be on the 1st of the month, then monthly thereafter. And Elena, she paused, half out of the car, the envelope heavy in her hand. You did well tonight. Very well. I'm glad I approached you at that cafe. I think this arrangement is going to benefit us both considerably. I hope so, Elena said, and realized she meant it with an intensity that surprised her. She watched the car pull away, then climbed the stairs to her apartment, the envelope burning against her palm like a secret. Inside, her roommates were watching a Korean drama in the living room, and she slipped past them to her room without conversation, closing the door and leaning against it. Only then did she open the envelope. $18,000 in neat $100 bills, more cash than she had ever held simultaneously. She stared at the money, feeling its weight, its possibility, its danger. She had entered a new world tonight, had crossed some invisible threshold that separated her previous life from whatever was coming. Harrison Vaught had seen something in her, potential or desperation or simply utility, and had offered her entry, and she had accepted, had committed herself to a role that would require skills she was not entirely certain she possessed. But she would learn them. She would become whatever this position required, would develop whatever capabilities were necessary, because the alternative, returning to the cafe, to minimum wage, to slow drowning in debt and invisibility, was intolerable. Elena placed the money carefully in the bottom drawer of her dresser, beneath clothes she rarely wore. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the full weight of what she had done. The weeks that followed assumed a rhythm that was simultaneously exhilarating and exhausting, each day bringing new demands that tested the boundaries of Elena's capabilities while simultaneously expanding them. She found herself inhabiting multiple roles: translator, cultural consultant, intelligence gatherer, diplomatic intermediary, each requiring its own set of skills and its own performance of competence. She was learning, with a speed born of necessity, how to navigate the particular ecosystem Harrison Vaught had constructed around himself, how to read the subtle signals that indicated his mood and expectations, how to anticipate needs before they were articulated. Her first weekly meeting with Dmitry Sokolov occurred at a Russian tea house in Brighton Beach, a small establishment that served elaborate pastries and strong tea in ornate glasses. Sokolov arrived 20 minutes late, a power play she recognized immediately, and settled into his chair with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully asserted dominance through minor inconvenience. Elena had waited without visible impatience, reading a book she had brought precisely for this purpose, Anna Karenina, chosen deliberately to signal both her cultural credentials and her comfort with her own company. "You read Tolstoy for pleasure?" Sokolov asked in Russian, gesturing at the book. "Most people your age only know him from university requirements, if at all." "I find his analysis of society remarkably applicable to contemporary contexts," Elena replied, setting the book aside. "The mechanisms of power and status he describes, they haven't changed as much as we like to pretend. Different costumes, same essential dynamics." Sokolov smiled, genuine pleasure animating his heavy features. "You see, this is why I insisted on these meetings. Americans do not understand this. They think the world changes fundamentally every few years. That technology makes everything different. But human nature is constant. Tolstoy understood this. Dostoevsky understood this. The great Russians always understood what the Americans cannot learn. Elena sipped her tea and allowed him to expound on this theme for several minutes, noting the way he used cultural commentary to establish rapport while simultaneously positioning himself as superior to the Americans he was nevertheless eager to do business with. It was a familiar Russian pattern, simultaneous attraction to and disdain for Western wealth and power, an ambivalence that shaped every interaction. When he finally turned to business, asking about progress on the real estate transaction, Elena provided the updates Harrison had prepared her to deliver. The contracts were being finalized. The financing structure was being reviewed by Sokolov's legal team. The sellers had confirmed their commitment to the timeline. Everything was proceeding according to plan. "And vote?" Sokolov asked, his tone carefully casual. "How is he to work for? Is he demanding employer? Fair employer?" The question was not casual at all, Elena understood. This was exactly the kind of intelligence gathering Harrison had warned her about. She answered carefully, choosing truth over flattery. "He's demanding but fair. He expects competence and discretion, and he compensates appropriately for both. I have no complaints." And his other clients? Does he represent many Russians, or am I special case?" "I've only been working with him for a few weeks," Elena said, which was true while revealing nothing. "I'm not familiar with his full client roster." Sokolov studied her face, searching for weakness or deception, then nodded slowly. "You are loyal. This is good. Loyalty is rare quality, especially in America where everyone changes jobs like changing shirts. I respect this." He paused, then continued with apparent casualness. "Of course, if you ever became dissatisfied with Vought, if you found his demands unreasonable or his compensation insufficient, you should know that I am always looking for competent people who understand both Russian and American cultures. I pay very well for such expertise." There it was. The offer Harrison had predicted, framed as hypothetical but clearly intended to plant seeds of potential betrayal. Elena met Sokolov's gaze steadily. "I appreciate the implication of the offer," she said, her Russian formal and precise, "but I'm satisfied with my current position. Mr. Vought has been generous, and I see no reason to consider alternative arrangements." Of course. I meant no offense, simply making observation that talented people should know their value in marketplace." Sokolov's smile was bland, but his eyes were calculating. "Now tell me, this Vought, does he have political connections? Real connections, not just donations to campaigns. I need to understand his actual influence if complications arise." Elena recognized this question as more serious, potentially more valuable intelligence. She deflected carefully. "I believe he has attorneys and consultants who handle political matters when necessary. The specifics are beyond my area of responsibility. I focus on translation and cultural consultation, not political strategy." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, Sokolov probing gently but persistently, while Elena maintained her boundaries with polite firmness. When they finally parted, she felt exhausted by the constant vigilance required to navigate his questions without either lying or betraying Harrison's confidence. She reported everything to Harrison that evening, sitting in his office while he listened with focused attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she mentioned Sokolov's employment offer, Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but rather confirmation of expectation. "He'll continue testing you," Harrison said when she finished. "The employment offer, the questions about my other clients, the inquiries about political connections, these are all standard maneuvers. He's trying to determine whether you can be turned, whether your loyalty is for sale at the right price. Your responses were correct. You didn't lie, but you didn't give him anything useful. Well done." "It felt uncomfortable," Elena admitted, "like I was being unfaithful to him, while he believes I'm simply providing updates." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're not being unfaithful. You're doing exactly what you were hired to do. Represent my interests in dealings with a client. Sokolov understands this. even if he's testing whether it's actually true. He would do the same in your position. In fact, I guarantee he's running parallel intelligence operations, having other people investigate me, verify information, assess vulnerabilities. This is how business is conducted at this level. Everyone is gathering information, everyone is testing everyone else, and the winners are the people who manage information most effectively. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the logic, even as she felt the weight of the ethical complexity. And if he offers me enough money to make betrayal worthwhile, what then? Then you tell me immediately and we discuss whether to turn the situation to our advantage. Harrison smiled slightly. I don't expect absolute loyalty based on abstract principle, Elena. I expect loyalty based on rational self-interest. As long as working with me benefits you more than working against me, I trust you. The moment that calculation changes, I'll know, and I'll act accordingly. This is honest relationship, not romantic fantasy. The bluntness was somehow reassuring. Elena appreciated clarity over comforting deception, pragmatism over pretense. That's fair, she said. Good. Now the contracts should be finalized by end of week. I'll need you at the signing meeting, which will be at my attorney's office in Midtown. Expected to take several hours. Sokolov will want to review every clause, will probably demand minor modifications to demonstrate his continued power in the negotiation. Your job is to facilitate, to keep the atmosphere productive, to prevent personality conflicts from derailing the transaction. Can you do that? Yes. Harrison pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. These are background materials on 2 additional potential clients. Both Russian, both interested in New York real estate, both with complicated situations that require careful handling. Read through these, familiarize yourself with their backgrounds and objectives. We'll be meeting with them next week. Separate meetings, different properties, but similar dynamics to the Sokolov deal. If those transactions proceed, you're looking at substantial additional bonuses beyond what Sokolov will generate. Elena took the folder, feeling its weight. More clients, more meetings, more complex negotiations requiring constant vigilance and performance. She was being drawn deeper into Harrison's world, becoming increasingly integral to his operations. It was opportunity, certainly, but also trap. The more valuable she became to him, the more difficult it would be to extricate herself if circumstances made that necessary. But she had committed to this path, had accepted his offer and his money, and retreat was not a viable option. She would move forward, would become whatever this position required, and would accept the consequences of that transformation. Over the following weeks, Elena's life assumed a pattern that bore no resemblance to her previous existence. Her days began early with language review and research into whatever clients or properties were currently under negotiation. She attended meetings with Harrison, sometimes just the 2 of them with potential clients, sometimes larger gatherings with attorneys and financial advisors where her role was to ensure that Russian participants understood not just the words being spoken, but the implications and subtext. She met with Sokolov weekly, their conversations following a predictable pattern. Initial cultural discussion, gradual transition to business updates, periodic testing through offers or probing questions. She learned to navigate his moods, to recognize when he was genuinely concerned versus when he was simply performing dissatisfaction to extract concessions. She reported everything to Harrison, who received her intelligence with the same focused attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed how carefully he was tracking all the moving pieces of his various negotiations. The Sokolov deal closed on a cold December morning, the signing ceremony conducted in a conference room with views of Manhattan that seemed designed to remind everyone of the stakes involved. Sokolov arrived with his usual entourage plus 2 attorneys, who reviewed every page with glacial thoroughness, occasionally demanding clarifications that Elena translated while maintaining an expression of infinite patience. Harrison remained calm throughout, answering questions with measured precision, never allowing frustration to surface even when the process dragged into its 5th hour. When the final signatures were affixed and the wire transfers confirmed, Sokolov stood and extended his hand to Harrison with something approaching genuine warmth. "We have concluded successful transaction, Vought. I am satisfied with process, with terms, with outcome. You have earned your commission honestly. Thank you, Dmitri. I hope this property serves your purposes well and that we can work together on future opportunities." Sokolov turned to Elena, speaking in Russian. "And you, Miss Markova, have been excellent intermediary. You have represented your employer's interests while respecting my need for clear communication. This is diplomatic skill of high order. I hope you will continue to work with Vought, as it will make future dealings much simpler." "Thank you," Elena replied in Russian. "It's been a pleasure to facilitate this transaction." "Pleasure," Sokolov repeated, his smile knowing. "Yes, let us call it pleasure. Though we both understand it is really business, which is better than pleasure because it is more reliable." He switched to English, addressing Harrison. "I will be in touch about other properties. I have partners who are interested in New York market, who would benefit from your expertise. Perhaps early next year we discuss additional opportunities." After Sokolov and his entourage departed, Harrison turned to Elena with an expression of unmistakable satisfaction. "That went well, very well. The bonus structure activated. Clean closing, no complications, completed within timeline. Which means your share is $160,000, as discussed." Elena felt the number impact her like physical force, though she kept her expression composed. $160,000. It was transformative sum, life-altering amount of money that would erase her debts, build substantial savings, fundamentally change her relationship to financial survival. "I'll transfer it to your account this afternoon," Harrison continued. "Take tomorrow off. You've earned it. We'll reconvene Monday to discuss the next slate of clients. I have 4 new potential transactions in development, 2 of which will definitely require your involvement. We're going to be very busy in the new year." Elena nodded, her mind still reeling from the bonus figure. "Thank you for the opportunity, for trusting me with this responsibility. You earned it through performance, not through trust. Trust is what develops over time through consistent demonstration of reliability. You're building that trust, Elena, but we're still early in the process. Continue as you've been doing, and we'll both profit considerably." He paused, then added with unusual directness, "You're good at this work, better than I expected. You have natural diplomatic instincts, ability to read people and situations quickly. Those are rare talents, and they're valuable in my line of business. I want you to understand that you're not just a translator to me. You're becoming a genuine asset to my operations." The compliment landed with unexpected impact, stirring something in Elena that she had thought long dormant: professional pride, sense of competence, feeling of being valued for skills rather than merely tolerated for utility. She had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely good at something, to have abilities that were recognized and rewarded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll do my best to continue meeting your expectations." "I know you will. Now go home. Get some rest. Celebrate if you want. You've earned that too. I'll see you Monday." Elena left the office building and walked through Midtown without clear destination, her mind attempting to process the transformation that had occurred over the past 6 weeks. She had entered Harrison Vought's world with desperation and uncertainty, and she was emerging with financial security and professional identity. The cafe job felt like distant memory, her previous poverty like nightmare from which she had finally awakened. She walked for hours, watching the city around her with new eyes. The shoppers laden with packages, the business people hurrying toward appointments, the tourists photographing landmarks. All of them suddenly felt like contemporaries rather than members of some separate caste. She was no longer entirely outside the city's prosperity, no longer merely servicing others' comfort. She had become, through her own capabilities and Harrison's recognition of them, someone with agency and means. That evening, she transferred $5,000 to her mother's account in Moscow, 10 times her usual monthly contribution. Then she paid off her credit cards entirely, watching the balances drop to zero with satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. She calculated her remaining funds, $153,000 in savings, plus her monthly salary of $15,000, continuing indefinitely as long as she remained employed by Harrison. She was not wealthy by Manhattan standards, but she was secure in a way she had not been since leaving Russia. More importantly, she had demonstrated to herself that she possessed capabilities that commanded value in the marketplace, that her education and instincts and adaptability could generate substantial income if properly directed. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, sitting alone in her small room while her roommates watched television in the other room, she felt strangely hollow, as though she had won some contest whose prize turned out to be less satisfying than anticipated. The work with Harrison was lucrative and occasionally interesting, but it was also ethically ambiguous in ways that troubled her when she allowed herself to think about it carefully. She was facilitating transactions that enabled wealthy Russians, some with questionable connections and possibly illegal funding sources, to park their money in American real estate. She was serving as intelligence operative in negotiations, where her ostensible role was neutral facilitation. She was performing loyalty to multiple parties while actually serving only Harrison's interests. None of this was technically illegal, and Harrison himself seemed to operate within legal boundaries, if sometimes near their edges. But there was moral complexity to the work that sat uneasily with the academic idealism that had once motivated her, with the belief that intelligence and education should serve some larger purpose beyond facilitating the powerful in their accumulation of additional power. But what choice did she have? The alternative, returning to minimum wage service work, to poverty and irrelevance, was intolerable. She had to earn living in the world that actually existed, not in some imagined world where intellectual virtue was rewarded with comfortable security. She had learned this lesson painfully in Russia, had learned it again in New York, and she was determined not to forget it. She would continue working for Harrison. She would become increasingly skilled at the various roles he required her to perform. She would earn substantial money and build the kind of financial security that protected against the catastrophes she had already experienced, and she would silence the voice in her mind that whispered about compromise and complicity, that suggested she was trading away something essential in exchange for material comfort. That voice, she had learned, was luxury afforded only to those who had never experienced genuine precarity. She had experienced it, had lived for 3 years with constant anxiety about rent and food and survival. She would not voluntarily return to that state, regardless of what ethical compromises were required to avoid it. She opened her laptop and began reviewing the background materials Harrison had given her on the next potential clients. There was work to do, roles to prepare for, performances of competence to rehearse. This was her life now. These negotiations and translations and careful navigations of powerful men's egos and interests. It was not the life she had imagined for herself when she had been young and naively idealistic, but it was the life she had, and she would make it work. The December cold intensified as the year approached its end, and Eleanor found herself increasingly busy as Harrison's operations expanded. The 2 additional clients from his folder materialized into actual transactions, both requiring her involvement in initial meetings and ongoing negotiations. One was a former government minister from Moscow looking to purchase a luxury penthouse as insurance against potential political reversals in Russia. The other was a consortium of businessmen interested in commercial properties in Brooklyn, men whose wealth seemed excessive relative to their ostensible business activities, suggesting revenue streams that would not withstand serious scrutiny. Elena performed her roles with increasing confidence, learning to read the particular dynamics of each negotiation, to recognize when clients were genuinely committed versus when they were simply exploring options. She learned when to translate precisely versus when to soften or adjust language to maintain productive atmosphere, She learned how to deflect inappropriate advances while preserving business relationships, how to gather intelligence without appearing to probe, how to maintain Harrison's confidence while managing clients' expectations. She was becoming, she realized, genuinely skilled at this work. It was not the career she had planned, but it was utilizing capabilities she possessed: linguistic facility, cultural knowledge, social intelligence, ability to perform roles while maintaining interior distance. In a different context, these might have made her successful academic or diplomat. In Harrison's world, they made her valuable intermediary between American capital and Russian wealth, facilitating transactions that enriched both while she collected her percentage. The new year arrived with crystalline cold, and Elena found herself standing in Harrison's office on a January morning, watching snow fall over Manhattan with the lazy indifference of weather that knew it commanded attention regardless of human schedules. She had been summoned for what Harrison had described as an important conversation, though he had provided no additional context, and she had learned over the past months that his silences often contained more information than his explanations. He entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, handing her one with the casual gesture of someone who had grown comfortable in her presence. This small intimacy, the coffee offered without asking, the assumption of her preferences, marked a subtle shift in their relationship. They were no longer simply employer and employee, but something more complicated, partners bound by shared success and mutual dependence. "I have a proposition," Harrison said without preamble, settling into his chair and gesturing for her to sit. "Actually, several propositions, but one in particular that I want to discuss carefully because it represents significant expansion of your role." Elena sipped her coffee and waited, having learned that Harrison preferred to structure conversations at his own pace. "You've proven yourself over these past months," he continued, "not just as translator but as genuine business asset. You read people well, you maintain composure under pressure, you understand the complex dynamics of international negotiations. More importantly, you've demonstrated loyalty and discretion, which are the qualities I value most. So I want to offer you partnership rather than employment." The word landed with unexpected force. Partnership suggested equity rather than salary, shared risk rather than compensated service, fundamental transformation of their relationship rather than mere evolution. "What exactly do you mean by partnership?" Eleanor asked carefully. Harrison leaned forward, his expression intent. "I mean that instead of paying you salary and bonuses, I bring you in as junior partner in my firm. You receive equity stake, initially 5%, increasing to 10% over 5 years if performance targets are met. You participate in firm profits quarterly, which based on current trajectory would exceed what you're earning under our present arrangement. More significantly, you gain agency in business decisions rather than simply executing my directives. You would have input on which clients we accept, which transactions we pursue, how we structure our operations." Elena felt her heartbeat accelerate, even as she maintained external calm. Equity stake, profit participation, decision-making authority. These represented not just financial advancement, but professional legitimacy, transformation from hired translator to genuine participant in Harrison's business. But partnership also meant shared liability, exposure to risks beyond her control, deeper entanglement in operations whose ethical ambiguity already troubled her peripheral involvement. "Why?" she asked. "Why offer this now, and why offer it to me?" Harrison smiled, apparently expecting the question. "Several reasons. First, practical self-interest. You're valuable to my operations, and I want to ensure your continued commitment. Equity stake creates stronger incentive for loyalty than salary ever can. Second, expansion strategy. I'm developing opportunities in markets beyond New York, Miami, Los Angeles, possibly London and Dubai. I need partners who can operate independently while maintaining firm standards and objectives. You've demonstrated capability to do that. Third, succession planning. I'm 52 years old. I need to build leadership infrastructure that can eventually operate without my constant oversight. You're young enough to grow into senior role over time. The logic was characteristically sound, each reason reinforcing the others in structure of mutual benefit. But Elena sensed something beneath the explicit rationale, some additional motivation Harrison was not articulating. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, echoing her question from their first business meeting months earlier. Harrison's smile widened slightly. "You're learning to read me. Good. What I'm not telling you is that some of my current business arrangements are becoming increasingly complicated due to political developments. Sanctions are expanding. Scrutiny of Russian money in American real estate is intensifying, and several of my clients are becoming nervous about exposure. I need partners who can help me navigate this evolving landscape, who can maintain client relationships even if my own profile becomes temporarily problematic. Partnership gives you independent standing with clients. You're not just my employee, but principal in the firm with your own authority and credibility." Oh, there it was, the hidden complexity, the risk that accompanied opportunity. Harrison was not simply offering advancement from generosity, but rather recruiting ally for uncertain future, distributing risk while maintaining control. Eleanor set down her coffee and met his gaze directly. "You're asking me to provide you with insulation if political or legal complications arise. If investigations occur, if sanctions create problems, I become the visible face of client relationships while you recede into background." "That's one way to frame it," Harrison acknowledged without apparent embarrassment. "More generously, I'm offering you genuine partnership that positions you for long-term success while acknowledging that current political environment creates challenges we need to navigate together. Yes, there are risks, but there are also substantial rewards. And the risks exist whether you're my employee or my partner. At least as partner, you profit significantly from the risks you're taking." The honesty was oddly compelling. Harrison was not pretending the offer was purely beneficial, was not concealing the complications behind attractive packaging. He was presenting it as genuine business proposition, shared risk for shared reward, partnership requiring mutual trust and mutual vulnerability. Elena stood and walked to the windows, watching snow accumulate on the city below. She thought about her life 6 months earlier, the cafe, the poverty, the sense of invisibility that had seemed permanent and inescapable. Harrison had offered her exit from that existence, and she had taken it despite uncertainty and ethical misgivings. Now he was offering something more, not just escape from poverty, but entry into wealth, not just employment, but ownership, not just service to his interests, but participation in defining those interests. She could refuse. She could maintain her current arrangement, lucrative employment without equity stake, continued salary and bonuses without partnership liability. It was a safe option, limiting both risk and opportunity, but safety had never actually protected her. Her academic career had seemed safe until personal involvement with wrong person had destroyed it. Her minimum wage job had seemed like stable poverty until Harrison's offer had revealed how precarious stability really was. Safety was illusion that postponed rather than prevented catastrophe. She turned back to Harrison. "I want 15% equity initially, increasing to 20% over 5 years. I want formal title as partner, not junior partner. I want equal participation in decisions about which clients we accept and which transactions we pursue. And I want legal counsel to review the partnership agreement before I sign anything. My own counsel, paid by the firm, but accountable to me." Harrison's expression shifted through several emotions rapidly: surprise, calculation, approval, something that might have been respect. "You've learned to negotiate. I'm proud of you, honestly. Most people in your position would simply accept what was offered." He paused, considering. I can do 10% initially, increasing to 15% over 5 years. That's genuinely generous given your limited contribution to firm assets and client relationships at this point. The title can be full partner. That's fine. It's symbolic more than substantive anyway. Equal participation in client and transaction decisions is acceptable as long as we maintain clear process for resolving disagreements. Ultimately, I retain majority vote on contested issues, but we formalize consultation requirement. And yes, you should have your own attorney review everything. I'll recommend several who specialize in partnership agreements, though you're free to select anyone you trust. Elena nodded slowly, calculating whether to push for better terms or accept the improved offer. 10% initial equity was substantial, particularly if firm profits continued growing at current rate. 15% within 5 years would make her genuinely wealthy by any reasonable standard. And formal partnership status, even with Harrison retaining ultimate authority, represented significant professional advancement. Acceptable, she said. When can you have the documents prepared? Within the week, we'll need to restructure the firm legally, file various documents, handle tax implications. My attorneys will manage that process. Once everything is formalized, we'll announce the partnership structure to existing clients and begin outreach for expansion opportunities. Harrison stood, extending his hand. Welcome to full partnership, Elena. I think this arrangement will benefit us both significantly. She shook his hand, feeling the significance of the gesture. She was no longer employee, but partner, no longer hired service, but co-owner of the enterprise. The transformation was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, opening possibilities while foreclosing retreat. The weeks that followed were consumed with legal documentation and business restructuring. Elena met with attorneys, reviewed complex contracts, signed documents that bound her to Harrison and his firm with increasing finality. She transferred additional funds to savings, paid off final debts, began contemplating investments that would compound her growing wealth rather than simply preserving it. She moved out of the Queen's apartment she had shared with roommates, taking a one-bedroom in Manhattan that cost $4,000 monthly, but offered privacy and proximity to work. She purchased new clothes suitable for partner-level meetings, assembled professional wardrobe that signaled competence and success. She hired an accountant to manage her increasingly complex financial situation, began working with wealth management advisor to structure investments appropriately. Her mother called from Moscow, confused by the sudden increase in financial support, worried that Elena was involved in something dangerous or illegal. Elena reassured her with partial truths: successful career change, lucrative new position, nothing to worry about. She did not mention the Russian clients or the ethically ambiguous transactions or the partnership with someone whose business practices existed in gray zones between legal and problematic. By February, the partnership was formalized and operational, and Eleanor found herself occupying office adjacent to Harrison's, her name on firm letterhead, her signature authorizing contracts and agreements. Harrison introduced her to additional clients and professional contacts, presenting her as his partner rather than employee, according her status and authority that transformed how others responded to her. She attended her first partnership meeting with firm's attorneys and accountants, participating in discussions about expansion strategy and risk management and client retention. Her opinions were solicited and considered, her concerns addressed with seriousness rather than dismissed as employee anxiety. She was becoming, she realized, genuinely integral to firm operations, her capabilities and judgment valued as essential rather than merely useful. It should have felt like complete triumph. Instead, she found herself experiencing strange melancholy, sense that something essential had been surrendered in exchange for material success and professional advancement. She was wealthy now, financially secure in ways that had seemed impossible 6 months earlier. She had professional identity and social status, respect from colleagues and clients, trajectory toward genuine prosperity. But she had also abandoned completely the academic idealism that had once defined her, had accepted without further protest the ethical compromises required by her new role, had become willing participant in systems she might once have criticized from comfortable distance of theoretical analysis. She remembered her younger self, the graduate student studying 19th century Russian literature, believing that intellectual engagement with past could somehow illuminate present, that understanding literary traditions could provide insight into human nature and social dynamics. That person seemed impossibly naive now, her idealism a luxury afforded by never having experienced genuine precarity or having to make actual choices about survival versus principle. But had that idealism been entirely misguided? The Russian writers she had studied, Turgenev, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, the women writers marginalized by canonical tradition, they had understood something about human nature that her current life confirmed. That people were capable of remarkable adaptation, that circumstances shaped character more than character shaped circumstances, that survival often required compromises that looked from outside like moral failure, but from inside felt like necessary pragmatism. She was not the same person who had arrived in New York 3 years earlier with tourist visa and desperate hope. She had been transformed by necessity and opportunity, had developed capabilities she had not known she possessed, had discovered that her education and intelligence could serve purposes beyond academic scholarship. The transformation was not comfortable, but it was real, and there was no returning to innocence once experience had complicated it. One evening in late February, Elena found herself in her new apartment staring at her bookshelf, the same volumes she had transported from Moscow to New York, to Queens, to Manhattan, witnesses to her various transformations. She pulled out her annotated copy of Anna Karenina, the margins filled with her notes from graduate school, her younger self's careful analysis of Tolstoy's social commentary and moral vision. She opened to a passage she had marked years earlier, Anna's reflection on her situation. "If I had not been what I am, I would have nothing but respect for myself. But as it is, I hate myself." The words resonated with uncomfortable precision. She did not hate herself exactly, but neither did she feel the uncomplicated satisfaction that wealth and success were supposed to provide. Her phone rang. Harrison, calling about client meetings scheduled for the following day. She answered professionally, discussing strategy and objectives, her voice confident and competent. When the call ended, she returned to Tolstoy, but the words no longer held her attention. She closed the book and set it aside. There was work to do, clients to manage, transactions to facilitate. She was partner now, with responsibilities and obligations that extended beyond personal satisfaction or moral comfort. She had made her choices, had accepted opportunities and their accompanying costs, had transformed herself into someone capable of succeeding in the world as it actually existed, rather than as she might prefer it to be. The months that followed confirmed the partnership's success. Firm revenues increased substantially as Elena brought in new Russian clients who responded to her cultural fluency and professional competence. She traveled to Moscow twice for business meetings, reconnected with former academic colleagues who were impressed by her transformation from failed graduate student to successful business partner. She sent her mother money that allowed her to retire from factory work, purchased apartment for her in better neighborhood, provided financial security that had been impossible when Elena herself was struggling. Harrison proved himself valuable partner, demanding but fair, strategic but flexible, willing to share both credit and profits. They developed working relationship based on mutual respect and complementary capabilities, trust built through consistent demonstration of reliability and competence. There were disagreements occasionally about specific clients or transaction structures, but Harrison honored their agreement about consultation and rarely overrode her concerns without serious consideration. By summer, Eleanor's equity stake had generated profits that exceeded her previous annual earnings from multiple years combined. She had savings sufficient to survive several years without income, investments positioned to compound over time, financial security that transformed her relationship to work from desperate necessity to strategic choice. She should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt something more complex, satisfaction mixed with unease, pride complicated by awareness of what had been surrendered to achieve it. She was successful by any conventional measure, but success felt different from inside than it had appeared from outside, more hollow and less transformative. One afternoon in early July, Eleanor sat in her office reviewing documents when Harrison entered unannounced, his expression serious in a way that suggested significant news. He closed the door and settled into the chair across from her desk. "We need to discuss something," he said without preamble. "I've received indication that federal investigators are examining several of my Russian clients. Not criminal investigation yet, but preliminary inquiry into sanctions compliance and money laundering concerns. This doesn't directly impact our firm currently, but it creates potential complications if inquiry expands." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was the risk Harrison had obliquely referenced when offering partnership, the political and legal complications that accompanied facilitating Russian investment in American assets. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "It means we need to be prepared for increased scrutiny. All our documentation needs to be impeccable, all our transactions clearly within legal boundaries, all our client relationships fully defensible. It also means some clients may become nervous and withdraw from active transactions, which could impact near-term revenues." Harrison paused, studying her face. "I want to be clear about something. If this situation escalates, if there are actual investigations or legal proceedings, you are protected as independent partner rather than employee. You have deniability about specific client relationships or transaction details that I manage directly. That protection was part of why I structured partnership as I did. So there it was, the insurance policy built into their arrangement, the reason Harrison had offered partnership beyond mere business expansion. He had anticipated this possibility, had positioned Elena as shield if complications materialized, had shared equity in exchange for shared exposure to potential legal risk. She should have felt betrayed or manipulated. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as though she had known all along that this moment would arrive, that the wealth and success had been purchased with risks that were now materializing. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Harrison's expression softened slightly, something like respect or perhaps relief crossing his features. "I need you to continue operating normally while I manage the investigation quietly. I need you to maintain client relationships and project confidence that everything is routine, and I need you to review all documentation related to your direct involvement in transactions to ensure everything is defensible if questioned." "I can do that. I know you can. That's why I made you partner." Harrison stood, moving toward the door, then paused. "Elena, I want to say something. You've exceeded every expectation I had when I approached you at that cafe. You've developed into genuinely valuable partner, and not just because you're useful in managing Russian clients. You have good judgment, strategic thinking, ability to navigate complexity while maintaining ethical boundaries. Whatever happens with this investigation, you've built real capabilities that will serve you well, regardless of whether our partnership continues." The compliment landed with unexpected impact, stirring emotions Elena had carefully controlled during months of professional performance. She had proven herself not just to Harrison, but to herself, had demonstrated capabilities she had doubted, had succeeded in a world that had seemed closed to someone with her background and limitations. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the opportunity, for trusting me with responsibility, for treating me as genuine partner rather than just compensated service." Harrison nodded, then exited, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the documents spread across her desk. She looked at the contracts and agreements, the evidence of months of transactions facilitating Russian wealth into American assets, and felt the weight of choices she had made and consequences now emerging. She could leave, dissolve the partnership, take her accumulated wealth, retreat to some simpler existence, free from legal risk and ethical ambiguity. Harrison had said she was protected, suggested her capabilities would serve her elsewhere. She had enough money now to survive comfortably for years while determining new direction. But she had never been someone who retreated when circumstances became difficult. She had survived academic disgrace in Russia, had rebuilt life in foreign country with no resources or connections, had transformed herself from invisible cafe worker to successful business partner. Retreating now would feel like failure, like surrender of everything she had worked to achieve. She would stay. She would navigate whatever complications emerged, would protect herself while supporting Harrison if investigations materialized, would continue building the career she had constructed from desperation and opportunity. This was who she had become. Someone who faced difficulties rather than fleeing them, who managed complexity rather than seeking simplicity, who succeeded in the world as it existed rather than as she might prefer it to be. The investigation Harrison had mentioned moved slowly through summer and into autumn, generating occasional anxiety but no immediate crisis. Clients remained nervous but generally committed. Transactions proceeded with increased documentation requirements. Firm revenues declined modestly but remained substantial. Elena continued her work with focused determination, maintaining relationships and facilitating deals while privately reviewing every document she had ever signed for potential legal exposure. By December, a year after she had first encountered Harrison in the cafe, Elena found herself standing in her office, looking out at Manhattan, spread below her. Snow was falling again, the same lazy indifference she had observed the previous winter, but everything else had transformed. She was wealthy now, professionally established, partner in successful firm with equity stake generating substantial income. She thought about the person she had been a year earlier, desperate and invisible, serving coffee to people who didn't see her as fully human, trapped in poverty that seemed inescapable. That person was gone, replaced by someone harder and more capable, someone who had learned to navigate complexity and compromise, who had succeeded in ruthless marketplace by developing ruthlessness of her own. The transformation had cost something. Idealism abandoned, ethical boundaries blurred, sense of moral clarity complicated by practical necessity. But it had also created something: financial security, professional competence, agency over her own life that she had never possessed before. She did not know whether she had made correct choices. She suspected that question itself was meaningless, that life did not offer clear moral calculus where right answers could be definitively identified. Instead, it offered series of decisions made under uncertainty, each foreclosing some possibilities while opening others, each transforming the person, making them in ways that could not be predicted. She was Elena Markova, partner in international business firm, wealthy by any reasonable standard, successful in profession she had never intended to enter. She was also Elena Markova, former graduate student who had studied 19th century Russian literature, believing that intellectual engagement could illuminate human nature. These identities coexisted uncomfortably, neither cancelling the other, both constituting truth about who she had become. Her phone rang. Harrison calling about client meetings scheduled for the following week. She answered professionally, discussing strategy and objectives, her voice confident and competent. This was her life now, and she would continue living it with whatever grace and capability she could muster. When the call ended, she remained standing at the window, watching snow fall over the city where she had remade herself, where she had learned that survival required transformation, and transformation required accepting that the person you become might not resemble the person you intended to be. But perhaps that was the central lesson of adulthood. that intention mattered less than adaptation, that survival required pragmatism more than principle, that success meant accepting complexity rather than seeking moral clarity. She thought Harrison Vaught had seen this truth in her that day at the cafe, had recognized someone capable of transformation because transformation was already underway. He had offered her opportunity, and she had seized it despite uncertainty and cost, because the alternative was remaining trapped in poverty and invisibility. Whether she had made correct choice was question she might spend years attempting to answer. But standing here now, financially secure and professionally established, she understood at least that it had been her choice to make, her life to transform, her responsibility to live with consequences. And somehow, that agency itself felt like achievement worth acknowledging, regardless of how uncomfortable the achievement sometimes felt.